Dear ladies and gentlemen, my name is Kristina Abelgaard, and I'm the Director of the Department for Ocean and Polar Research at the Research Council of Norway. I'm also today's moderator. First, I would like to welcome you all to this seminar with the heading Co-designing the Ocean Science We Need for Polar Regions. In fact, now there has been 278 registered for this seminar, and we find that very, very good. You are from a lot of different countries all over the world, and for some of you it's quite late in the evening, and for some of you it's early in the morning. But anyhow, we hope that you will all have a very interesting and inspiring time. In 2015, the United Nations committed to achieve 17 Sustainable Development Goals by the year 2030. The ambition is to meet the needs of the people living today without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. One of the goals, SDG 14, concerns life below water. We must ensure clean, safe, productive seas and ocean. The ocean is crucial for our lives. The ocean is the largest ecosystem on this planet. It provides billions of people with food. It produces oxygen. It plays an important part in regulating the climate. It is also important for our recreation. In addition, economic growth is expected by utilizing the marine resources and the services the ocean provides in new and better ways. We are talking about food production, energy production, maritime transportation, tourism, and also the possibility to identify new resources. At the same time, we recognize that the oceans suffer from great pressure, overfishing, pollution, the effect of climate change. And the polar regions are very vulnerable, and the change there very visible. For instance, the polar regions are experiencing global warming at a much faster rate than other places in the Earth. So it's quite obvious for all of us that we have to manage our ocean in a much more sustainable way. We have to move beyond our usual business and behavior. We do need more knowledge. And to meet the challenges and also to take advantage of the opportunities, we need research and innovation, new technology, data, more data, better data. This calls for collaboration across disciplines, across different sectors, not only across ocean-based sectors, but also across land-based sectors. Norway really welcomes UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. International collaboration is decisive. We have to join forces in order to understand the changes and the complexity of the polar region. The last decades, the Arctic has attracted much attention. We also believe it's important to put focus on the Southern Ocean and the Antarctic. And therefore, these 2 hours will be dedicated to the polar regions. I'm muted. I'm so sorry. We will explore opportunities and challenges and discuss best practices and the lessons learned. We will identify recommendations for the ocean community that can deliver transformative decade actions for long-lasting benefits to the ocean and society. A short regional discussion paper will be produced after this session and made available. I'm very happy to be moderating this important session, but I will start with some practical information. First, a little bit of guidance to the participants. I want to make sure that you all know that this session will be recorded. A link to access the recording will be shared on the Decade webpage. You may be viewing this webinar on your computers and laptops or on smaller tablets and cell phones. Those of you using small screens, please note that when a panelist gives a presentation and uses slides, you will have to use scroll buttons or to scroll your screens to the left, right to see the presentation and or the panelist. I would also like to note that I will not give a lengthy introduction to our panelists because they have a very impressive and long CVs, all of them, so that will take too much time. But you will find the full bios of all speakers are listed on the series webpage. We will also open for a few questions after the Arctic and Southern Ocean part and at the end, but you can always write questions at any time. Now I think it is time to introduce the first speaker of today's seminar, and that is Marie-Hélène Bovin, who is from the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO, IOC, who is the United Nations entity responsible for the Ocean Decade. And IOC is also co-organizing this seminar together with us. So please, Marie-Hélène Bovin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Christina. Can you hear me well? And thank you all for joining today. It's a real pleasure to be here. And before we get into the details of today's sessions, I'd like to quickly go over some key elements of the decade and the transformation it seeks to trigger. So the decade wants to move from the ocean we have to the ocean we want, and places ocean science at its core. Its vision is getting more and more recognized as a tagline. Next slide, please. But what I would like to point out is that ocean science is considered here in its broader sense. It's about natural science. It's about social science. It's about local and indigenous knowledge. It is looking at the interface between land and sea, ocean, atmosphere, and cryosphere. It's about the infrastructure, the data, the capacity, and technology essential for supporting long-lasting and impactful solutions. The mission statement, Transformative Ocean Science Solutions for Sustainable Development, Connecting People and Our Ocean, tries to bring together some key elements that underpins the decade. First, we're talking about transformative science. We're not talking about business as usual. Secondly, we need ocean science that is focused on solutions for sustainable development. Science that links knowledge generator to the end users, that is action-focused and that can work to strengthen the science policy interface. And finally, ocean science that connects people in the ocean, that can trigger behavior change at all levels and leads to the step change that is needed. Next slide, please. So we need to have science that is transformative because of the questions it is asking. Who is doing it? Where it is being done and by whom it's being used. Science that motivate actions and lead to innovative and sustainable solutions. And this slide really shows where we are right now and where we want to go. Next slide, please. So to bring this to reality, the implementation plan for the decade was developed. It is based on an extensive consultation process. It sets out a decade action framework, which is a strategic framework that tries to conceptualize how the decade envisions achieving its ambitions. That framework starts with the decade actions, which are tangible on-the-ground actions that will take place at all levels, local, national, regional, sub-regional, and global level. The actions will be organized around a series of decade objectives, and those objectives describe the overlapping steps in the process to move from the ocean we have to the ocean we want. And finally, the actions will be developed to contribute to one or more of the decade challenges. These challenges represent the most immediate and pressing needs of the decade, and it is expected that they will evolve over the course of the decade. In this context, I cannot stress enough how co-design, co-production, and co-delivery of decade actions are critical to achieve the decade's objectives. It requires the active and direct involvement of many disciplines and sectors. But this is not an easy task, and I hope that together, today, we will draw out some key insights to help create the enabling conditions required to support such transformative and collaborative ocean research for both polar regions. Insights that will inform your reflection on decade actions and your approach to develop them as well. And before we move on to the meat of today's sessions, I just want to thank, on behalf of the IOC, the Research Council of Norway for co-organizing this session with us, and Sweden for its contribution and support of this series on co-designing the science we need for the ocean we want. I really look forward to the discussion. Thank you. Christina, over to you.
Thank you very much, Marie-Hélène. You mentioned that there has been a quite impressive consultation process. And also, when it comes to the polar regions, there has been 3 workshops that have been conducted to this area. And that's the Arctic Ocean Decade Workshop has been conducted, and also on the Southern Ocean. And last week there was a workshop on Arctic Ocean Action Plan. So we will have some presentation from the highlights from these workshops, and we will start off with the Arctic Ocean workshop, which took place in Norway. So the next speaker is Jon Fuglesøv, a senior advisor from the Research Council of Norway. Please, Jon, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I will give a short update on the Tromsø workshop, which was arranged by the Research Council of Norway in cooperation with IOC and the annual Arctic Frontiers Conference in Tromsø. The workshop had something like 100 participants from approximately 15 countries. The workshop focused on 4 of the societal outcomes of the decade: a clean, healthy and resilient Arctic Ocean, a predicted Arctic Ocean, and a sustainable, harvested and productive Arctic Ocean. Some of the highlights from the workshop. Even if there are ongoing changes in the Arctic Ocean, we often do know enough to act, but still there is much we don't know about the Arctic Ocean. An important aspect with the Arctic is that most of the sources and drivers of change is outside the Arctic. However, Arctic has faced higher and more rapid temperature rise than elsewhere in the world. You are all familiar with the melting of the sea ice, and the increased temperatures, and the so-called Atlantification of the Arctic, meaning that we have increased sea temperatures and northward migration of boreal species. Important about the Arctic Ocean is that it's not uniform. There are huge differences, for example, between the Beaufort Sea and the Chukchi Sea on the one side and the Barents Sea on the other side. Our knowledge about different parts of the Arctic Ocean differs very much. We know, for example, quite much about the Barents Sea, but we know much less about the Central Arctic Ocean, for example. The differences between the Arctic Ocean regions also impact the society and the people living in these areas. One example is the food supply and the traditional hunting, which also differs very much between these regions, and how people in the different areas use the sea ice for hunting, for example. The workshop results highlight that people and the ecosystem is affected by a combination of factors, and we often don't know enough how these factors interact. The workshop also highlighted the need for data collection, data storage, and data sharing, including the importance of long-term observations. Let me finalize by telling that the workshop also discussed the management mechanism and stewardship of the Arctic Ocean, and the concern that the reaction time of such mechanisms often are too slow for the ongoing rapid Arctic changes. And the full workshop report can be found and downloaded from the Ocean Decade website. Thank you.
Thank you, Jon. Now I would like to introduce the next speaker, and that is Professor Eileen Hoffman, who is with the Center for Coastal Physical Oceanography, Old Dominion University of US. Please, Eileen, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you so much. And I want to thank the organizers for the opportunity to talk to you briefly here about the outcomes of the Southern Ocean Workshop. If I could have the slide, please. The Southern Ocean Workshop took place earlier in 2020. It was a one-day workshop, and it was attended by about 30 participants representing 11 nations. Because it was a one-day workshop, we focused on 3 of the 7 UN decade themes, which are shown here: the healthy, resilient ocean, predicted ocean, sustainable, productive ocean. Within each of these, we came up with some key recommendations. 3 examples are shown here, but there is one overarching recommendation that I want to direct particular attention to, which is the need to implement a coordinated international circumpolar observational system that focuses on key species, the total carbon budget, providing coverage of the annual cycle in the Southern Ocean, and importantly, to quantify the role of sea ice in regulating ecosystem productivity. So this overarching theme, as well as the recommendations from each of the separate themes, are detailed in the report from the workshop, which is posted on the UN Decade website, and the link to the workshop report is given at the bottom of the slide here. Subsequent to this, there has been extensive Southern Ocean community input to the UN Decade Implementation Plan. We've recently submitted a proposal to the Belgian Science Foundation to hold a follow-on workshop in conjunction with the annual Polar Data Forum in 2021. We're participating in webinars and meetings such as this, and we're involved in the UN data efforts through the International Ocean Data Exchange. As a final comment, I'd like to talk briefly about the Southern Ocean Observing System, which is an infrastructure coordination activity for the Southern Ocean community that is supported by SCAR and SCORE. SOOS has a well-developed communication and coordination strategy. It's planning UN Decade activities as part of its new 5-year implementation plan. And so I encourage you to engage with SOOS as the Southern Ocean UN Decade planning progresses, because SOOS represents a well-developed network that can facilitate the development of a UN Decade program. So I thank you for your attention, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks a lot to you, Eileen Hoffmann. Then I have the pleasure to introduce the next speaker, which is Christian Risager Simonsen from Danish Center for Marine Research. Please, the floor is yours. We cannot hear you, Christian. Are you with us?
Yes, now you can hear me, right?
Yes, now we can hear you and also see you.
Great. So thank you for having me. Could I have the next slide, please? Okay, well, in that case, as said, yeah, my name is Christian. I'm from the Danish Center for Marine Research, where we have been so fortunate to get the role as coordinator for the development of an Arctic action plan in support of the Ocean Decade. So you could think of this as the follow-up to the workshop which Jon mentioned in Tromsø. So the key motivation for this is basically to put a spotlight on the Arctic and to ensure that it's positioned correctly as a part of the Ocean Decade. So in order to do that in a reasonable way, what we are trying to achieve within the next 2 to 4 months is to translate this global decade into an Arctic regional context. So the way to do this is to translate it into the specific challenges of the Arctic. In other words, what are the challenges for achieving the safe, clean, productive outcomes, which is highlighted in the decade framework. Hopefully, we will also be able to argue for what specific actions will be needed, also cross-cutting, and finally, hopefully, to deliver a relatively detailed description of the particular actions, who should do it, and how it could be achieved within the next decade. Next slide, please. Now, co-creation and co-design was mentioned earlier as one of the key steps to form the overall implementation plan. This is also something we are striving for in the regional context, where we have taken the decade framework, as shown on your screen, and basically make working groups based on each of the societal outcomes. And for each outcome, we have designated particular chairs with working groups. Now, we have been very fortunate to have more than 400 people signing up for these working groups. And for the first session, more than 230 also participated. So over the next month, we will produce the input to the final plan, which we will synthesize together with the task force, which we have as support. And hopefully in the spring 2021, we will have a draft which will be presented in March. So all of you will be able to go in and review it and provide comments with everything which we have overlooked so far. So hopefully by summer 2021, we will have a final Arctic Ocean action plan for inspiration for the next decade. This was all for now. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Christian. Now we have heard quite interesting presentations of all the planning process concerning the polar regions, and it's, as far as I can see, there has been a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of extensive participation. So that's lovely. So now we will switch, in fact, to our focus to the main theme of today's seminar, and that is co-designing the ocean science for the polar regions. And we will start with a presentation of the concept of transdisciplinarity to make sure that we are all on the same page. This presentation will be given by Lilian Balsrud, who works at the Research Council of Norway, and she was appointed as a national expert to the OECD working group on addressing social challenges using transdisciplinary research, and she was also a co-writer on the report with the same name. Lilian, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to this webinar. So in this presentation, I will share the findings from the recently published OECD report. And firstly, I will present the scope of the report, and then I will briefly sketch out the definitions and concepts. And lastly, I will share what the report highlights as success factors and barriers for conducting transdisciplinary research. Next slide, please. So the report, or the project, was set up by OECD Global Science Forum, which is an OECD body aiming to support countries to improve their science policies and share in the benefits of the international collaboration. And the aim of the project and the goal, as you can see here in the presentation, the goal was to identify policy actions to promote transdisciplinary research to address grand societal challenges. And in the design of the project, before we decided on what the outcome should be, we were asked to deliver a systematic analysis of practices and challenges. We were asked to do case studies and interviews, where we ended up with 28 in-depth case studies, which provided the basis for the analysis presented in the report. And these case studies were research projects of different geographic and financial scales, covering a range of topics, and none of these topics could be fully addressed using traditional monodisciplinary, interdisciplinary, or just participatory research. And finally, we were aiming to promote mutual learning. Next slide, please. So we started off with deciding on a definition for TDR, consisting of two main elements. It had to be a collaboration between social science and humanities on the one hand, and then the STEM subjects on the other hand. And it had to be engagement of non-academic stakeholders. Next slide, please. So, which problems require transdisciplinary research? And TDR can address complex problems beyond the reach of traditional science, particularly those that require the application of contextual knowledge unavailable to researchers. TDR can offer a practical way to address contested, high-stakes societal problems where knowledge is uncertain. And TDR can add new dimensions and perspectives to traditional research approaches. TDR can provide social benefits beyond pure scientific insights, and TDR often generates significant lasting benefits. Next slide, please. So we also saw a need for clarifying the different and various concepts that have been used to describe this type of research. And as participatory research brings together academic and non-academic partners to exchange knowledge without necessarily integrate that integrating that knowledge. Co-designed research relates to the first phase of the research process, in which researchers and non-academic partners jointly develop a research project and define research questions that meet their collective interests and needs. So TDR is both radically interdisciplinary and participatory. Co-creation is participatory, but not necessarily radically interdisciplinary. Next slide, please. So I do believe many of these features, as I mentioned in the previous slide, applies to many different aspects of polar research. And building on this previous slide, TDR has certain key characteristics and associated theoretical and methodological underpinning. So each project is different depending on the particular context and problem to be addressed. Next slide, please. So we also found that many of these 28 TDR projects had encountered similar obstacles and often pointed to the same success factors, even though they came from different countries, they were based in different national R&D systems, and they addressed very different topics and challenges. So the common success factors were sufficient time and resources, mutual understanding and coordination in the planning phase was highlighted as important, building on pre-existing relationships. Structural mechanisms for management and cooperation had to be in place, and co-leadership between the partners could be an advantage. Lastly, capacity building was also mentioned as very important. Next slide, please. So the barriers of the project, the PIs most often encountered could be both on project level and on a more systemical level. And for the project level, lack of communication and structural facilities were mentioned, competition among the participants, and different expectations were also very common to encounter. Next slide, please. On the systemical level, the common challenges were differences in terminology, challenges with integration of different types of data, lack of support for institutions, incentives and rewards, and lack of career advanced systems, which mostly was tied to disciplinary priorities, and also lack of TDR funding and TDR publication options. And lastly, it was also common experience to have encountered jurisdictional boundaries and various challenges tied to international cooperation. Next slide, please. So in the report, we make several recommendations to the agents and actors in the larger R&D or R&I system. And reflecting on the findings from the report, I would like to highlight that it seems very important for TDI research that the system as a whole and the interplay between the different levels and actors are set up to facilitate this type of collaboration. You need the funding and incentives from government and funders. You need support from academic communities and universities, institutions, and you need willingness to cooperate and overcome the obstacles from all the participating agents. So with that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm very much looking forward to participate and listening into the rest of this seminar.
Thank you very much, Lilian. You have certainly presented a lot of aspects that is nice to pick up in the questions and the discussion later on. So now we will move to the Southern Ocean part of this event. Please note, we use the term Southern Ocean, while maybe some of you are more familiar with Antarctic Ocean. In general, we define the Southern Ocean as south of the 60 degrees southern latitude and encircling Antarctica. The melting of the Arctic sea ice has attracted much media coverage and much more than the Southern Ocean, as already mentioned. The Arctic and Antarctica are quite different, with the Antarctic mainland surrounded by the ocean, and there's no people living there. Activity in the area is regulated in the Antarctic Treaty, originally signed by 12 countries. Later, 42 more countries have acceded to the treaty. Important provisions of the treaty are that Antarctica shall be used for peaceful purposes only. There is freedom of scientific investigation and observation and shall be made freely available. And with that said, I would like to introduce you to our first speaker in this part, and that is Ole Arve Misund, who is the director of the Norwegian Polar Institute. He has extensive research and management experience both in the Arctic and Antarctica, but now he will address the Antarctic research. Please, Ole Arve, the floor is yours.
Thank you, thank you for inviting me to this important webinar discussing the challenges we are having in fulfilling the research objectives needed to have a sustainable development both in the Arctic and especially in the Antarctic. In the Norwegian Polar Institute here in Tromsø, we are of course focusing much on Arctic research. That's about 75% of our activity, but we are also active in Antarctica, where we are running the Troll station in the Dronning Maud Land area. And we are also, with our new research vessel, able to carry out research in the Southern Ocean. The main challenges in the Southern Ocean research, as we see it, is the lack of data. There are big areas which, as more or less no activity from a scientific point of view has been carried out. It's a big data desert actually, and large regions that are virtually unvisited each year, and from which very few direct ocean measurements are obtained. Of course, access is often a critical and limiting factor in conducting research in the Southern Ocean, and greater access is required over longer periods of the year if we are going to have a good recording system of the development that is now going on in the Southern Ocean and around the Antarctic mainland. The costs of doing research in the Southern Ocean is usually very high because of the remoteness, the long distances, and the complicated logistics. The cost of running our Troll station, for instance, is of the same order as for running the large research ship that we recently have acquired together with the university here in Tromsø and the Institute of Marine Research in Bergen. Technology is vital, and technological advances not only support ongoing science, but may also limit what kind of science can be done, especially when we need good communication and good supporting systems. This can be a limiting factor. And of course, funding is vital, that we have good funding from our governments and from our research councils, so that we can fund high quality and expensive research for the years to come. If I then could have the next slide, please. The way to overcome these obstacles and these challenges is, of course, international collaboration. I myself I'm a delegate from Norway to SCAR, the Scientific Committee on Antarctic Research. This year we should have our main meeting in Hobart in Tasmania, but this was not possible due to the COVID-19 disease that is now all over the world. But we are maintaining contact through digital platforms and webinars like this one. The Southern Ocean Observing System has been already mentioned by Eileen Hoffman, and through this international collaboration, we see that the Southern Ocean is changing, as it was described in the last IPCC report on the sea and the cryosphere. There is regional warming, it's decreased salinity in the upper and the abyssal upper layer and the abyssal ocean. We see the first sign of basin-wide acidification. There are regional decreases in sea ice. At land we see the glaciers melting also, and we see substantial shifts in the ecosystems. For instance, the large krill resources moving further to the south. We shifts in fish communities and in the marine mammal communities in the Southern Ocean as well. And we need to better monitor and understand the changes in order to predict the future changes and mitigate the impacts. So there are many opportunities in how to deal with the challenges that we have in the Southern Ocean research in the years to come, and I want to use the opportunity to show what can be done. We had our first cruise with our new research vessel last year to the coast of Antarctica, to Dronning Maud Land, with the aim of providing better knowledge for an ecosystem-based management of the area. In particular, we aim for participating in a proposal for an MPA together with European countries that are proposed for the Weddell Sea region and also for the Dronning Maud Land coast. We saw a lot of birds, the humpback whales, other whale types, the penguins, and so on. But and we know that these animals were there from before. But what surprised us more was when we were able to do underwater sampling. On the next slide, we see from the trawl deck a lot of fish species in the laboratory, ice mackerel. We even got a few toothfishes. There were a number of squid species, myctophids, lanternfishes, amphipods, shrimps, of course, sponges, and other bottom fauna. Actually, a very rich fauna in the Southern Ocean, close to the ice shelves, that we were able to do trawling with our new research vessel, and gained a much better insight of this rather fragile but also very productive ecosystem there. Of course, the echo sounders all the time recorded these large krill resources that we know so very well, and for which there is a sustainable harvest already, and Norway is one of the largest fishing nations. So these new vessels, they give us a much better possibility than we have before, but we also, if I have the next slide, have a long tradition on tracking animals, and a recent publication show the results from the following of or tracking data from a number of predator species in the Southern Ocean, where they were able actually to delimit the areas of ecological significance, and also to envisage how these areas might develop in the years to come, when we know that global warming will change the Antarctic or the Southern Ocean ecosystem substantially. But back to this development of the new research vessels, we are not the only country. If I have the next slide, there are a number now of new vessels coming. The Chinese Xuelong 2 in a harbor, I think it's in New Zealand from last year, where the picture was taken. I myself attended the naming of the new British Sir David Attenborough, given the name by the Duchess of Cambridge. We see the Duke of Cambridge and also Sir David Attenborough on the deck there above the name of the ship. It's a very large, very modern ship, and with these new vessels, we hope through SCAR and through the SUS system to coordinate surveys in the Southern Ocean in the years to come, to much better sample the ocean and to much better observe the different parameters needed to understand and to model and to predict the development that this vital ocean is going to have for the years to come, and to advise our authorities and how it shall be managed. And if I can have the final slide of my presentation to stick to the time before Christina is raising her hands. This is a slide taken from an ROV where we see a sea feather and an octopus looking at it, the blue one, and a shrimp in the back, at about 1,000 meter depth off the Dronning Maud Land in the Southern Southern Ocean. We have never seen this type of organisms and this type of pictures from that area before, so this is really new insight for us, and definitely a type of knowledge that is needed for giving our authorities advices on how to establish a marine protected area, for example, for a sustainable development of the Southern Ocean in the years to come. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to share some of the thoughts we are having on how to contribute to the Southern Ocean research for the years to come. Thanks for listening so far.
Thank you, Olav. You are just on time, and it's a quite fascinating creature that you have presented for us. So now I would like to introduce our next speaker, which is Alexander Klepikov. He is a Deputy Director of the AIRI and head of the Russian Antarctic Expedition. He is involved in numerous international programs and groups, including AMAP, SCAR, and many others. So please, Alexander Klepikov, the floor is yours. Alexander, we cannot hear you. Are you with us?
Yeah.
Thank you. Very lovely.
Yeah. Okay. Good day for all. And first of all, thank you very much for the invitation for such nice meeting, nice webinar. I will give you some comments to the first question of the so-called Polar Region Dialogue, namely how to foster interdisciplinary approaches in the Southern Ocean studies. First of all, the interdisciplinary approaches in Southern Ocean studies are very well situated, very well organized at the international and the national levels. And I will give you some examples. First of all, it's of course activities of SCAR, and this is a Southern Ocean Region panel expert group organized by CLIVA, CLIC, and SCAR. And this group is very active in organizing interaction between the meteorology, oceanographic, cryosphere, geology, biogeochemistry, and paleoclimate studies in the Southern Ocean. Another very active and important SCAR groups is expert group on Antarctic sea ice processes and climate, so-called ASPECT. It is this group has a quite long history, and also it's very well organized this communication between different scientists, physical scientists, biological scientists, sea ice scientists, which worked mainly in the Antarctic sea ice zone. Another SCAR group is a forum for research into ice shelf processes, so-called FRISP, which coordinate researches, multidisciplinary researches of glaciologists, oceanographers, and atmospheric and climate people. And it is also very important, first of all, to estimate the ice sheet contribution to sea level change. Next slide, please. Another important project for multidisciplinarity of Southern Ocean science is Southern Ocean Observing System. It's mentioned by Eileen and also by Ole. It's a group of, it's a project of SCAR and SCORE, and one of the mission is to facilitate and design and implementation of comprehensive and multidisciplinary observing system for the Southern Ocean. And it's a very important project. It's baby of the International Polar Year, and I think it will be a good development of this project. Another initiative, important initiative organized by SCAR, it's Antarctic and Southern Ocean Science Horizon Scan. And I have selected here several questions that are related to multidisciplinary research. You can see the slide many cross-cutting issues between atmosphere people, glaciologists, oceanographers, and biologists. And all these cross-cutting issues are very important, and it will be challenges for the next period of research in the Southern Ocean, organized by different national Antarctic expedition, and this expedition are also coordinated by COMNAP, the Council of Managers of National Antarctic Projects, which use this question as a background for development of science studies in the Southern Ocean. Next slide, please. And of course, for interdisciplinarity, it's very much important to have interdisciplinary international projects in the Southern Ocean. In former times, it was different projects like Winter Weddell Gyre study in 1989 and Weddell Sea ice camp in 1992, and of course there are many international projects during International Polar Year, and it is very important to have such projects in future. And another example of international cooperation important for interdisciplinarity is Antarctic Circumnavigation Expedition, or ACE, organized by Swiss Polar Institute on board of Russian research vessel Academic Tereshnikov. 22 projects was selected for this cruise for many different domains, and 54 researchers were on board, and absolutely different ecologists, oceanographers, meteorologists, and glaciologists, and this cruise was quite successful, and it is very important to have such projects in the future. And during these projects, it also special school on board for 50 young scientists were organized called ACE Maritime University. It is also important task to for involvement of young polar researchers, polar oceanographers. It's also very important task of the decade of ocean science. And for national interdisciplinary Southern Ocean research, I would say that in most national Antarctic programs, the marine research are multidisciplinary, because it's quite expensive to send a vessel to the Southern Ocean, and all national Antarctic expedition try to do on board of the vessels during Antarctic cruises as many different observations as possible. So thank you very much for your listening.
Thank you very much, Alexander Klepikov. Then I have the pleasure to introduce the next speaker, which is Amy Jackson. And Amy Jackson, you joined the British Antarctic Survey in 2018, developed the new operating dynamic required to transition the research vessel RRS Sir David Attenborough into business as usual. You have recently taken on the additional role of Business Change Manager for Future Antarctic Capability, focusing on understanding key user requirements for future infrastructure projects. So please, Amy Jackson, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Christina. Good day, good afternoon, good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to be speaking today and hope I can bring a slightly different perspective to this afternoon's session. If you go to the next slide, please. So my core role at British Antarctic Survey has been to introduce a new operating dynamic to respond to the wide variety of changes that are taking place across our organisation, as well as to instigate a programme of business change, which includes essential developments in process, procedure, infrastructure, equipment and people resources. In this short presentation, I hope to share with you firstly why BAS is undertaking organisational change, what our core objectives and blueprint for the future are, and how we are approaching transformation. So to start off, why are we transforming in the first place? So polar science is always undergoing change of some kind. However, BAS has been going through a particularly significant period of change over the last 5 years. The main catalyst for transformation has been the introduction of our new research vessel, the RRS Sir David Attenborough, or the SDA, that Ole very kindly previously mentioned. The ship, which incidentally is just in the process of starting her sea trials, brings a huge amount of benefit to marine science. She brings an enhanced scientific capability with new equipment and facilities that have previously not been readily available to the UK science community, increased capacity on board for up to 60 scientists at one time, longer endurance at sea, so the vessel can carry out extended cruises in new regions of the Arctic and Antarctic, as well as improved operational benefits, such as rapid logistics through containerisation and increased fuel delivery capacity. This ship will truly change the way that BAS delivers marine science. However, our new single ship is replacing our traditional 2-ship operating model, one for science and one for logistics. This single ship operating model means that we're required to fundamentally rethink the way that we programme and deliver science and operational support in the Antarctic. Additionally, BAS is undergoing a significant infrastructure modernisation programme of our Antarctic stations, which is linked closely to the introduction of the SDA, and that is going to drive changes to the way that we operate in the future. And as well as some of these direct changes that are impacting BAS, we need to make sure that our science organisation is able to adapt to increase funding success and remain sustainable in the future. The introduction of UK Research and Innovation, our new parent organisation, has changed the funding landscape, and BAS needs to make sure that we can adapt to continue delivering the high-class science that we have been doing up to now. Additionally, there are other significant strategic changes that are requiring us to adapt, including introduction of our new sustainability strategy, aiming for decarbonisation of our estate and net zero operations by 2030. So initially, our change focus have been on 5 key areas: new operating models on stations to support introduction of the SDA, modernised and integrated logistics as a result of increased containerisation, making sure we have the right numbers and skills of people that we're going to need to support science on the SDA and on our stations in the future, extended planning horizons and integrated planning processes, and finally understanding the impact on our science and engineering models and how we need to adapt to remain sustainable in the longer term. However, it quickly became apparent that if we wanted to really successfully adapt our organisation to support the scale of change that was coming our way, there were some fundamental business building blocks that also needed developing to ensure the changes would be enduring and effective. Next slide, please. As a result of this, an organisational transformation programme was developed with the overarching aim of making BAS fit for the future in all respects. It aims to consider the changes needed to introduce the new assets and infrastructure, along with the development of science strategy, all underpinned by enhancing our core corporate service and business systems. We have set ourselves a blueprint for the future that focuses on ensuring that BAS is able to respond and adapt to financial and strategic changes externally, that we're able to focus on reducing our environmental footprint in all our decision making. Digital transformation is a very significant part of our transformation programme. We need to make sure that we've got a flexible workforce that can support changing demands of science and operations. We need to make sure that BAS science can respond to increasingly diverse funding streams. And finally, we need to make sure that BAS has a modern, sustainable operating model that reflects investment in our assets and infrastructure. We've got 8 core work streams that span the entire organisation, which are shown in this figure here, focusing on finance, human resources, IT and business systems, science, operations, engineering, communication, safety. All of these are key aspects to our change programme. However, it's important to understand that none of these work streams should be considered in isolation. The real benefit of tackling such a wide scope of work concurrently is that changes being developed in one area are considered alongside changes in another area. It ensures an organisationally aligned process and supports joined up thinking and builds opportunities for collaboration. The transformation itself has a role to play in breaking down internal silos and supporting cross-organisational thinking. Next slide, please. Change is a notoriously tricky subject. Many people find change very challenging to accept and often quite threatening. Therefore, a clear plan is really essential when you're starting out on such a significant change programme. So I thought I'd share with you a few of the things that we've really found have helped us to develop our own. So firstly, a cross-organisational approach. So by extending our transformation programme to include all aspects of our organisation, it provides an opportunity for a cross-organisational approach and for everyone to feel involved, which subsequently means that many more people are bought in at the start of the process. Next, communication is absolutely key. It's a key aspect of any successful change management programme. We've utilised a variety of different methods and approaches of communication, including town hall meetings, short news stories, one-to-ones, team meetings, videos, the list goes on. But the key is regular and targeted communication with a clear objective. Next, the next thing that we found very helpful is bringing in experts with the skills and capability to hit the ground running effectively. That has been really crucial to our success. A fresh pair of eyes on the organisation can often be very beneficial to highlight things that those that are much closer to the organisation may not be able to see. However, it's really important to remember that experience and understanding of how the organisation works, and any polar science organisation is often very niche, that remains really critical. We found that by blending experts from outside teams with our internal existing BAS experience has quickly allowed us to get to the heart of the problem by collaborating, and allows us to come up with creative solutions to some of the problems, but solutions that will work for BAS. Next, the role of leadership should not be underestimated in a transformational change programme. Without full support from the top, it's very challenging to truly embed the changes necessary to make an impact. That said, it shouldn't just be about that executive team or the directors. Everybody in the organisation has a role to play, and therefore everyone should be brought in at the start. And then finally, if an organisation is serious about transformation, it's important to make sure that there's appropriate funding in place. We've attempted many change programmes over the years. However, trying to deliver this as part of our business as usual often puts a huge strain on teams trying to deliver the day-to-day, and therefore the change initiative will often be the first thing to give. Sufficient funding to provide the resource and systems in place to support a transition over a realistic period are absolutely essential. So to bring this together, my final thought. So whilst BAS is undergoing a significant level of transformational change at the moment, it's important to remember that one of the only constants in an organisation is that change never stops. Whilst a transformation programme is a really great way to catalyse change, the key to success really is continuous improvement, scanning the horizon for external change drivers, and looking inwards to regularly review and adjust the way we work really is the only way to remain sustainable in a rapidly changing science world. And just on time, I think that's me finished. Thank you, Christina.
Thank you very much, Amy Jackson. Change never stops. That's quite sure. So now we have been listening to 4 excellent presentations. We have heard about interdisciplinarity. We have heard a lot about challenges in the southern oceans and the need for data and so on, and the challenges with changes. So there is now opening, we are soon opening the floor for questions. And just to repeat, if you are asking questions, you should click on the question button and write your question. And if the question is addressed to a specific person, please indicate who, and we will read out the question. And also, if you want your affiliation to be mentioned, you must write it because we can only see your name. But first, both Olav Mysun and Alexander Klepikov mentioned SCAR, that is Scientific Committee for Antarctic Research, in their presentations. And we are very fortunate because we have a SCAR representative with us today, Catherine Ritz, and I can see you on my screen. So you are the Vice President for Science in SCAR, and you will give us a comment on this, and please, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Christina. So SCAR is a international scientific committee that covers 44 member countries and 9 international unions. The role of SCAR is to initiate, develop, and coordinate high-quality international scientific research in the Antarctic region, both on the continent and the Southern Ocean. SCAR also provides objective and independent scientific advice to various organizations like the Antarctic Treaty System, IPCC, and many other institutions. The Southern Ocean community is very well organized, and through SCAR and SUS, we have good connections into communities that represent all sectors, including industry, tourism, policy, operations, national and regional programs. Alexander Klepikov already mentioned many activities led by SCAR, so I will focus on the new things that happened very recently. SCAR effort is the highest priority is through its scientific research programs that we call SRPs. 3 new projects were recently approved, and I will briefly describe them. One is instant Antarctic ice sheet dynamics and global sea level. Another one is UNCLIM Now, near-term viability and prediction of the Antarctic climate system. And the third one is Anticon, integrated science to support Antarctic and Southern Ocean conservation. All 3 projects have an ocean component, and all projects have plans for collaboration with other organizations, but also with stakeholders in order to co-construct the development of the project. So SCAR is looking forward to the planned future collaboration within SUS and other partners. And these 3 projects are a door to enter new doors to have collaborations. You can have a better description of them on the SCAR website, www.scar.org, which is very easy. They are still under the name of PPG because it was planning groups, but they have been accepted last week. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. There are a few questions and a bit out of time, but we have also we will permit one question. And Jon, please, you can read it out loud, and then we'll see who it's addressed. Please, Jon.
Thank you. It's not directed to one specific speakers, but more the Southern Ocean speakers as such. It was mentioned by both Mysun and Klepikov coordinated surveys in the Southern Ocean and the expensive costs and logistics with the surveys there. Are there specific plans for how to coordinate surveys in the Southern Ocean, in a meaning of not only one-off events, but long-term plans for coordinated survey.
Okay, who would like to answer? Olav, I can see you, so I guess, would you like to comment, please? Thank you, Olav.
Yes, this is a discussion that is now underway, as Katrin mentioned in SCAR, in the meetings there. With these new research vessels coming, the new so David Attenborough operated by BESS in UK, with our vessel, with the new Australian vessel, the Chinese vessel, and that has been built the last years. There are now discussions on how to do that. The plans are not matured as yet, but they are underway. And in the years to come, I think this will be an important activity in Southern Ocean research, where we will try to share the large areas into sectors and do coordinated surveys to map the areas and observe the different parameters with much better technology than we have used so far. A recent example of such coordinated survey has been the krill survey that was done in Western Antarctic, in the western part of the Southern Ocean in the winter of 2019 with 5 vessels. I think that was involved from different countries. But what we are speaking of is to map the whole Southern Ocean with these new vessels coming. And the plans are underway and will be developed in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olav. Quite ambitious plans and with good prospects, I guess. So I think we'll just move forward to the third part, and I will just remind you that it will be open for questions and discussion after this next part as well. But then let's move to part 3, the Arctic Ocean. The Arctic Ocean, as you know, undergoes huge changes, as was mentioned in the reporting from the preparatory workshops. The declining sea ice affects the marine ecosystem, but also opens the Arctic Ocean for more human activity and industrialization. In all the ongoing ecological changes, we should not forget the indigenous and local people living in the Arctic and their social ecological resilience and how people adapt to the ongoing changes. I also want to mention that change in the Arctic is not only due to climate change. There's also social changes, infrastructure, like internet connection and education, which are important drivers for the changes. And with these words, I would like to introduce to you to the first speaker in this part, which is Philippe Archambault. He is a professor in biology at Université Laval and scientific director of the Canadian Network of Centres of Excellence ArcticNet. He works to link fundamental biodiversity questions and theoretically research on global change and its effects on ecosystems functioning to applied science and policy making. So please, Philippe Archambault, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this presentation. First of all, I want to say thanks for this invitation. It's a pleasure to be with you virtually. I would prefer to be with you physically. The title of my talk is really broad, but I decided to tackle and to focus on a few specific questions that IOC suggested to address for the dialogue. Next slide, please. We all experience a rapid transformation. Next slide, please. Thank you. We all experience the rapid transformation of the Arctic. The decrease of ice cover is transforming the Arctic with increasing ship traffic and potential consequence, as the picture can show here. We have food web modification that's bringing challenges for the northern communities, especially on food safety and security. All these problematic need to be tackled by interaction among discipline and sector from the academic, private industry, or the governmental entities. Next slide, please. So I will try to answer this first question, how to foster transdisciplinary and interdisciplinary approach in ocean research. Next slide. Change in climate, like an algal production in the ocean, can affect country food quality and eventually food security and safety for health of the Inuit. Here's an example, the BRIGHT project. It's Bring Global Change in with Health and the Transforming Arctic Ocean. That look at the food web and how the food web transfer good compounds such as omega-3 from algae up to the Inuit through invertebrate or fishes and marine mammal. This is their country food. So these food web, the marine food web component has been studied in a multi and interdisciplinary approach. And thanks to Lydian to explain what is multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary, I don't need to do it anymore. Thanks. So next slide, please. However, climate will affect the marine food web. We know that through cascading effect with decreasing food or changing food security. And we know that a lack of few compound could bring health issues for Inuit people. The scientists, by identifying and communicating their result on the relationship between changes in the marine food web and the food security and the health issue, allow the decision maker of the public health agency to help northern community to adapt to some extent to the situation. Here we definitely have a transdisciplinary approach and even conversion research. However, to achieve this, you need to answer the second question, which will be on the next slide. Next slide, please. So when you start a project to get up to this transdisciplinary way, you need to involve all actors at the beginning of the process. The challenge is the time. It's always take time to have all actors in the planning process and designing, but it is much rewarding at the end. The actor need to recognize also Arctic indigenous people as right holders and knowledge holder in the Arctic. You need a direct involvement of all actors is necessary at every step of the process, especially for indigenous people. A general, communal, and inclusive view of science question need to be done. Finally, an appropriate and fair partnership need to be put in place and funding for indigenous people in their participation also. So we have the scientists, the indigenous people, but also we can include the industry. So next slide, please. Here I will show you rapidly two examples. Expert in optic photonic, the one in the top of the blue line in the middle. So they are expert in optic photonic, microelectronic, oceanography, and marine ecology, all work together with international private and public sector partners to shed light on the physical and biological property of the ice covered. They even deployed the light and their nutrient new probe during the Mosaic expedition that had a few weeks ago, or even a week ago, if I remember well. The second example on the bottom involve engineers, ecologists, physiologists, Inuit, and robotic expert all together to try to develop an under ice hyperspectral LiDAR project specifically. So the private sector would involve straight at the beginning. In both projects, what could look like a potential conflict of the end product, as academic research is often open access, sharing data, etc., and the industry is to make profit. However, both entities, the private and the public here, need to find some benefit. One way, it's through the Sentinel program in Laval University and in Canada, they decide to invest funding straight at the beginning if you can only partner with the private sector. So by attracting the private sector straight at the beginning and having some matching fund in the project, so the industry is saving money, and working with the academic sector, you can reach this kind of product. The knowledge transfer, the next slide, please. So you have all these results with the industry, with the research, but the knowledge transfer is a key element and instrument to be more inclusive. The first step to be more inclusive and interdisciplinary is to include as much expertise and type of knowledge in a workshop or virtual workshop, I would say, and identify common research priorities. Once the project is started, you need to ensure that the data are interoperable, free, and accessible in a relatively short period of time. The synthesis and interaction of information from multi and interdisciplinary project could converge in report or scientific paper. As an example, ArcticNet and its integrated research impact study for the Canadian Arctic, more local, publish peer review report on a web portal of the different project already funded on a specific topic, but by merging the expertise, they even answer a specific question, such as where should be the next marine protected area in Canada in the north? This includes traditional knowledge, oceanography, and also biodiversity, all integrated and updated regularly. You can also have more global report and integrated information from experts of different countries. And finally, you can also publish paper in some scientific journals, such as Arctic Science Journal, that promote co-production of knowledge. However, to do all this, there's a major hurdle, and we need to identify mechanisms from grant agencies to fund international and multidisciplinary program or knowledge type project that start at the same time, not in different time. So in the past, we have some project in Canada and Norway, but if both are 1 year difference in time, that's difficult to create this kind of information. Another way to transfer the knowledge, next slide, please, is through education. Education, it's also a major way of transferring knowledge. Kids need to be attracted or excited by science in general. As kids are now attracted by application or video game, so there's some group in partnership with the private sector who developed a game, the iBio game, for example. The game allowed a kid to understand and create scenarios of the effect of decreasing the ice in the Arctic. You can also create some scientific material, which also are co-construct, I will say, and used by teacher in different school board. This is an example where this is a one-pager that is about the Arctic phenomenon that kid and teenager observe in the Arctic, send these observations to scientists where they create some these fact sheet. This one is about berry plant, but we're creating some for the ocean presently. The one which is really original, it's also the one totally on your right. So student in Canada, when their science class or in a HIMAX cinema in Victoria here in Canada, and they were talking with divers in the Arctic. They are asking questions directly to the divers that were wearing full mask and speaking to the kids and students. This material is still available for parents, teacher, etc. This material, so the last time we did this kind of dive in the Arctic, there was more than 300,000 viewers. So finally, for the university level, we should promote the University of the Arctic, which is a cooperative network of university, college, and research institute concerned with education and research in and about the North. So finally, next slide. One way to go ahead and fulfill some objective of the decade of the ocean science, which you can see here in the panel, is probably to make research convergent. Here, I mean by convergent science, it's defined as an approach to knowledge production and action that involve diverse teams working together in novel ways. This needs to be done through transdisciplinary discipline and organizational boundary. With this approach, I believe we can overcome many challenges that we will face during the next decade. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Philip. Then I'll just move to the next speaker, which is Larry Mayer. He is chair of the US Committee for the Ocean Decade and professor at the University of New Hampshire. Larry has more than 20 years of experience with Arctic research, and he will now give a talk which he himself has characterized as a wild idea, an international Arctic research program. So Larry, we are very excited to hear your presentation. Please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Christina. We'll see how well it's accepted. I'll have the next slide, please. When I was first approached to participate in this event, I was approached in my capacity as the chair of the U.S. National Committee for the Decade of Ocean Science. And I was asked to talk about the exciting and transformative research projects that we would be promoting in the Arctic. And I had to explain that we've only just established this national committee, and we're really not ready to offer you projects that we're promoting because they haven't quite bubbled up yet. But what I'd like to do is just spend the first few minutes briefly introducing the U.S. National Committee, and then speak on a personal basis about something I feel very strongly about with respect to challenges and opportunities for collaborative research in the Arctic. The UN Decade calls for national committees as an integral part of both the coordination structure and the global stakeholder forum. The vision of the decade is that the national committees are the focal point for coordinating national activities representing all stakeholders, including federal and political partners. And while there is tremendous enthusiasm in the US for participation in the decade from individual scientists and from individuals at our federal funding agencies, in these very strange political times in the US, it's not easy for our federal partners to officially join in on a UN sponsored activity, a new one. And so the federal agencies, and in particular NOAA, have asked the Ocean Studies Board of the US National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, which is at arm's length from the government, to serve as the US National Committee. Next slide, please. We see our role as one of encouraging the participation of US stakeholders, all stakeholders, academics, research organizations, federal and state agencies, NGOs, industry, and so on. We're going to provide a communications hub for information about US Decade activities and international efforts. And the key is a very active website. I have the web address up there. And in defining our role, we view ourselves as not the brains. It's the US community that are the brains of Decade efforts. We're really the nervous system. And we're going to be communicating and promoting activities to the federal agencies, to industries, NGO, and with the UN Decade structure. But most importantly, what we hope to do is to catalyze and foster transformative projects that support Decade goals and engage a diverse group of early career scientists. And we put out a call for concept papers that we call ocean shots. Next slide, please. We define an ocean shot as an ambitious transformational research concept that draws inspiration from expertise from multiple disciplines and fundamentally advances ocean science in support of sustainable development. Next slide, please. We've established a series of criteria for selecting ocean shots that will promote both with our funding agencies and with the UN Decade structure. And we're calling for them to be relevant, of course, to the Ocean Decade challenges. We want them to be visionary, inspirational, realizable. We want them to be trans, inter, multidisciplinary, the kind of TDR that Lillian was talking about. We want to bring sectors outside traditional ocean sciences in. We want to leverage international participation and collaboration, capacity build, and of course, build a community that's just, diverse, equitable, and inclusive. And so that we've set these criteria. We'll be evaluating the concept papers. The first call went out just last week with a due date of December 1st. And so hopefully at your next meeting, I'll be able to present some of those nice ideas. Next slide, please. With that presented, what I want to do now is take off my hat as the chair of the U.S. National Committee and speak as an individual, or as I described, a crazy academic, and talk about something that I think is critical to the success of collaborative research in the Arctic, and that's the establishment of a truly international Arctic research program. Next slide, please. I do this as an individual, but one with, as Christina mentioned, many, many years of Arctic experience on a number of research platforms. And as I've worked over the years to build Arctic research programs, it's become remarkably clear to me, as I suspect it is to all of you, and as we've heard in almost everything discussed today, that the tremendous logistical challenges, the limited infrastructure, and complex political situation in the Arctic cries out for international collaboration. Next. And we've seen a number of positive steps in this direction over the past few years. We've heard about some of them today. The U.S. National Science Foundation in Sweden have established a program of coordination for using the Odin. Nordforsk provides a mechanism for collaboration among Nordic nations. Mosaic, which we've heard mentioned and we'll hear more about in a few minutes, was a wonderful example of collaboration. I can't imagine that its coordination was all that straightforward, but maybe we'll hear more about that. Next slide, please. And most recently, the Arctic Funders Forum, again, presents many, many positive statements about coordination and collaboration. And as I said, all of these are very important steps in the right direction, but each one of these next, and I think Philippe mentioned this, is really, next slide, please, is really a house of cards. In that typically the collaborations are based on projects funded by individual nations and individual agencies. The timing can be offset, as Philippe mentioned. Some may be funded. Oh, okay, that's all right. Leave it there. Some may be funded and others not. But the failure to fund some can jeopardize the viability of the entire project. And if one card fails, maybe it won't jeopardize the entire project, but it will certainly compromise the objectives and goals of the proposed science. So I asked if we can take the next step and think about a truly international Arctic research program, one that actually commingles funds and allows coherent, long-term, efficient planning that will assure the best and most important science can be done. Interested nations can contribute both research dollars and access to assets like icebreakers, allowing the international community to make long-term coherent plans for broadly interdisciplinary programs. It would also allow much broader participation as less active nations can buy smaller shares but still participate. And I know that at this point, every bureaucrat is cringing and thinking of all the reasons why this would be impossible, but I want to point out that it is possible. Next slide, please. And that we have a wonderful example with international scientific drilling, which is commingled funds for more than 50 years, leading to what I think is without question one of, if not the most successful earth science research programs in history. And I think if you ask anyone involved in the international drilling program, they'll tell you that it's been the ability to commingle funds and the international collaboration that has allowed that has led to the success of the program. We're entering a very critical time in the evolution of the Arctic and its impact on global change and sea level rise. And I'm hoping we can use the attention and goodwill that will be generated by the Decade of Ocean Science to see if we can, perhaps under its umbrella, create a truly international Arctic research program. It won't be easy, but it can be a remarkably powerful approach to addressing issues that are critically important to the long-term stability of our planet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Larry. You have to have ambitions if you want to.
It's easy for an academic to say, huh?
And again, you also had a very inspiring presentation, like the previous ones also had. So I have now also the pleasure to introduce our next speaker, which is Kari Fannar Laurusson. He is a program manager at the Conservation of Arctic Flora and Fauna Secretariat, which is the biodiversity working group of the Arctic Council. Kari has been involved in the release and follow-up of the Arctic Biodiversity Assessment, as well as the Circumpolar Biodiversity Monitoring Program. So Kari, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Christine. I hope you can see me. I've been having some technical problems here. You bring up my...
Yes, we can see you. That's lovely. Just go on. We can see you.
Okay. Do you have the slides? Can you hear me? Yes. Can you change the slides?
Yes, we have this. I can be on. I have my video on, so you can have some contact. Yes, we see your slides and we can see you, Kari. Please just go on.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you, everybody that's presented. It's been very informative. So when I think about the next decade, I think the challenge is how do we better harness our knowledge and capacity to inform timely and effective decisions in the face of cumulative and accelerating change. As we know, the Arctic is changing very rapidly. Next slide, please. So while I think it's extremely important to consider sort of what is the new knowledge and the new science we need, I think it's also important to keep in mind the existing and ongoing processes. Within the Arctic Council, I thought that maybe two activities were sort of the most may be important and needed to be brought to your attention. Not that I know that many of you are very well aware. One is the Action Plan for Biodiversity, which was developed in 2013 and goes until 2023. And we are now in the process of developing a new one to align with the post-2020 agenda. And then the Arctic Marine Strategic Plan. These are strategic plans aimed at sort of, based on a lot of research and science and intended to provide recommendations and allow for the tracking of the implementation of those recommendations. Another key thing I think is very important is a project of ours called the CBMP, Circumpolar Biodiversity Monitoring Program. What's relevant to this group is both our coastal group, which is, I would say that within the Arctic Council, we have, like many other places, been a little bit stuck in our silos or research disciplines, but are more and more now both opening up to traditional knowledge, indigenous knowledge, and the coastal plan was just released now in 2019, where we are working with a co-production of knowledge system. And I think to see in the next decade within ocean research is more participation from indigenous people. And I think now what the situation we have is that you do not go to a single meeting without the importance of IK or TK being mentioned. But what is maybe lacking is support for meaningful engagement, including travel support, stipends, and other kinds of support to be able to engage. Then another thing, we have the marine monitoring plans. And what the CBMP is in short terms is that we are working to try to coordinate the biodiversity monitoring of the 8 Arctic states, including incorporating different knowledge systems. But while I think, I would say, the CBMP is evolving. It's not super exciting, but what it is coordinated monitoring, working on sort of trying to coordinate data. And I think it's very important that we strengthen the base, which is biodiversity monitoring, because monitoring is, unfortunately, it's not very attractive, it's not popular, and but I think it is the base we need for decision making. And this is not only biodiversity monitoring, but just monitoring as a whole. And then also there's this ongoing SAO marine mechanisms, which you should be aware of, but maybe not, nothing to report on that. Next slide, please. Finally, yes, I think maybe my main message is that while transformative research is very important, I think it's important to keep in mind that we know very much already, and we know enough to act on so many things. So when I think about the next decade, I wouldn't want to sort of spend 10 years making another plan, because we made many plans, we made many recommendations. So hopefully this will be the decade where we implement these recommendations and strive for real change. I think I'm probably spent my 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Kari. We did have some problems with the sound, but I'm quite sure that we got your main message. We have to implement the actions now and not only develop new plans. So thank you very much. Then I would like to introduce the next speaker, which is Anders Oskal. He is the Secretary General at the Association of World Reindeer Herders and he's also the Executive Director of the International Center for Reindeer Husbandry. Oskal holds a Master of Science in Business Administration, specialized in innovation economy. He also is an Executive Committee member of the Arctic Economic Council. So please, Anders Oskal, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And first and foremost, thank you to the organizers for the invitation. I am honored to be the one to try to carry the voice of Arctic indigenous peoples. And I am very happy that the organizers have remembered also to include Arctic indigenous peoples in this timely and important event. I also want to thank some of the panelists, which views I could much ascribe to. When we look at the Arctic, of course, the Arctic indigenous peoples have very long histories in the North, and we could talk a lot about that. I myself work for the reindeer herding peoples of the Arctic, which are the nomadic indigenous peoples representing an original Arctic civilization across the North. 24 different indigenous peoples. As you can see, our homelands are widely dispersed from this map. And from this map, you also see that a lot of the Arctic coastline is in fact pasture areas, homelands for our peoples. And while many of our reindeer herders also use the ocean, we could say that, as was mentioned earlier today, what happens outside the Arctic is very relevant for the Arctic. Well, the same way what happens in the ocean, the Arctic Ocean, offshore, is also highly relevant for what is happening onshore on our ancestral homelands. And we can today observe unprecedented change, climate change, land use change, and globalization. We can basically forget about talking about 2 degrees warming for reindeer herders in the Arctic. Some of our regions in eastern Siberia, for instance, have already experienced over 6.2 degrees warming of seasonal pastures the last 30 years. So, of course, this will have a severe impact on our societies, and the combined drivers of change. Hang on, go back one slide. The combined drivers of change constitutes a legitimate concern for the resilience and future of some of our reindeer herders. Next slide. Next slide, please. Yes. The reality when we, no, one back. Yes, keep that one, thank you. The reality of our situation, looking at the changes occurring, is that indigenous communities, indigenous peoples are usually not very well positioned to focus on the opportunities of a changing Arctic. Challenges are important to address for sure, but to have a successful outcome, we believe that also the opportunities must be within our reach. Next slide. And we can observe today, of course, there is talk of sustainable development in the Arctic. And we've had from the Brundtland Commission in 1987, that term was coined. We've since had the Millennium Goals, and now we have Sustainable Development Goals. Be that as it may, reindeer herders don't have any words in our languages for sustainable development. On the other hand, when we look at these discourses, well, everything today should be sustainable, which is good. Next slide. But I think we also need to have a discussion about science. Where is the sustainability of science? Because science as an activity builds society. And therefore, where science takes place cannot be a random question. How and in which way will science build our indigenous societies? Societies which today are facing the brunt of the combined drivers of a changing Arctic in our homelands. We could talk about co-production as is addressed in this session. With regard to that, I think also we need to have a look at transboundary roles and transboundary institutions, building and bridging the gaps between scientific knowledge and traditional indigenous knowledge of our peoples. Next slide, please. If we turn again back to the ocean and try to navigate towards perhaps some of the opportunities as well. This is a map showing the sea route utilization in 2018, the northern eastern sea route, that is. And of course, there are many challenges connected to this, not least related to pollution and security in ocean ecosystems and waters. But if you look at Siberia, especially eastern Siberia, these are areas with very limited infrastructure. That is also true for reindeer. Next slide. So what we have been thinking about is the idea to also utilize these new sea routes as a market channel also for Arctic indigenous peoples products, because the sea, the areas close to the sea are summer passes for quite an extensive number of reindeer. And the technology already exists, container-based technologies, in combination with supply ships carrying frozen or fresh meat for that matter. Next slide, please. So in this sense, we need to also reflect on how science can contribute to bringing also our products to market, thus supporting the local economies of Arctic indigenous peoples. So that this is an opportunity not only for mining and forestry and transport as such, but also truly an opportunity for our societies. Next slide. And this is indeed what we are trying to do with some of our initiatives in the Arctic Council. This is from a youth project that we have in the Sustainable Development Working Group, where we made efforts to train our future leaders. A course in food innovation leadership together with Nord University and Northeastern Federal University in Russia. Nord Universities in Norway. We also have a brand new leadership training program in the name of Jim McCarthy, whom I'm sure many have heard of in this group, where we focus on leadership also in face of changes and shocks like COVID, like forest fires, and for that matter, marine incidents. So we need more of these science and traditional knowledge-based initiatives to train our youth for the future. Next slide, please. As representing some of the original inhabitants of the Arctic, the reindeer herding peoples, representing an original civilization of nomadism across the north, we would not like to be seen merely as stakeholders, rather also right holders to our ancestral homelands. And while we need to address the challenges at hand, as said, we also think we need to be able to grasp some of the opportunities of changing Arctic on our own terms, not becoming, let's say, cleaning deputies at the mining plant or workers at industrial trawlers offshore, but on our own terms, use our own knowledge to develop our own societies. Because we believe it is then and only then that an opportunity of a changing Arctic can really be an opportunity for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anders. Now we have heard 4 speakers, and they have all clearly demonstrated how everything is connected and the importance of working together across sectors and the involvement of different people, and also you have addressed the importance of engaging the younger generations. So we have to obviously work more interdisciplinary also in the Arctic. and include especially the coastal population there. And bridging the gap with the knowledge was also mentioned. So there's now time for you to write some more questions if you have something on your heart. And while you are doing this, we will have also some comments. And the next one will be our Japanese friend, Mr. Takashi Kikuchi, who is from JAMSTEC, the Japan Agency of Marine Earth Science and Technology. So please, Takashi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Christine. Can you hear me? Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm very happy to have this opportunity to join in this meeting. As already mentioned, we had and we are now conducting the international Arctic research project, such as Mosaic, for example, Synoptic Arctic Survey, Distributed Biological Observatory, and the TAF and AMAP and PAIN and many other projects. But however, we still lots of gaps in knowledge and data, especially thinking of future accurate prediction on Arctic ocean conditions. I totally agree that we need more challenge and opportunity for the Arctic ocean research. In Japan, a new Arctic research project named Second Arctic Challenge for Sustainability, ACT2, initiated in June 2020 as a continuation of the previous Japanese Arctic research project. Under this project, we continue and hope to extend the Arctic ocean research as well as other Arctic research with international collaboration. Also, it's very important point that Japan is now considering building a new icebreaker for the Arctic ocean research. She will be able to allow us to collect pan-Arctic and full depth accurate data in the Arctic ocean, which should contribute for the more accurate future prediction, such as warship or geotrace observation in the world ocean. Also, to contribute to capacity building for the Arctic ocean research. I think she will be working for the Arctic ocean mainly, but also work for other global oceans, including the Southern Ocean. Finally, I would mention that third Arctic Science Ministerial and Arctic Circle Japan Forum will be held in May 2021 in Tokyo. Soon, the session proposal of Arctic Circle Japan Forum will be open. I think it is a great opportunity to continue our discussion for the Arctic Ocean research, and I would like to propose a session of Arctic Ocean observation under the UN Ocean Decade at the Arctic Circle Japan Forum. That's all of my comments, and thank you very much, all of the organizers of this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Takashi. We have also one more comment, which is from Volker Ratschel. He is from the German Arctic Office, Alfred Wegener Institute, the Helmholtz Center for Polar and Marine Research. Volker, are you there? The floor is yours.
I'm here. Thank you very much for inviting me to make a short comment. And I was actually asked to speak about Mosaic. And I guess probably all of you heard about the Mosaic expeditions, was the largest expedition in history. And I don't want to use my 1 minute to speak about the science and the Mosaic expedition, but rather focus a bit more on the lessons we've already learned, or the achievements that we are already seeing after this major undertaking. And I think the one thing that was already mentioned, of course, is international cooperation. I think Mosaic is probably an excellent example of the importance of international cooperation in the Arctic. Without that, it would have never worked. So there were 20 countries involved in Mosaic. And I think it was the only major activity in the Arctic that continued despite the COVID-19 crisis. I think that's also remarkable. And that also leads me to the second point. I think that it's also an example of science diplomacy, because in particular, the cooperation with Russia that we had within Mosaic was extremely important. And of course, this is an instrument that we can also consider in terms of what we call science diplomacy. The other two things are more related to, let's say, to how it is perceived in Germany, especially in the public. There was a film crew of the German television on board Polarstern, and they produced a 90-minute documentary, which will be shown in 2 weeks and during prime time in German television. So today, for example, I had the plumber in the house, and when he heard that I work for the Alfred Wegener Institute, he was so keen to hear more about the Arctic and about the Mosaic expedition. So I think this is, the world is changing after such a thing. And the last example is the impact on politics. So just a few days after Polarstern returned back to Bremerhaven, our foreign minister called Markus Rex, the expedition leader, to hear about the expedition and what they learned. And you hear lots about the Arctic now in the speeches of our politicians. I think this is a really remarkable development that we are seeing after this expedition. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Volker. Then we will open for a few comments, questions to this Arctic part. Are there any questions to this specific part before we go to the open up for everybody? We will have one more comment before we do that. So are there any, then Jon, please.
Yes, thank you. We have received one question. I think it's for all of you who have presented now for the Arctic. What do you find are the main challenges for cross-sectoral cooperation between different actors in the polar regions? Are there one specific factor who's the main challenge? Are there several? Is it the timing between national programs? Is it the funding? Is it possible to say what are the main challenges?
Oh, that was a very broad question. Any of the panelists that are eager to try to answer this or give comments on it?
This is Larry. I'll chime in quickly, and I think I made my point that I believe that the funding, the House of Cards structure is one that is the huge challenge. But I think also we heard, I forgot who it was, maybe Lillian talked about, when we really talk about cross-sectoral programs, we have the issue of expectations, that often different groups have very different expectations about what may come out of a program. And I think we need to address that very, very, very early on.
Thank you very much. And that's good. Yeah, Philip, please, and put on your camera if you would like to say something. So Philip, please, it's your turn.
I just want to say I fully agree with Larry with the funding. It's a major point. It's a house of cards. And also I would say potentially with the private sector, it takes a while in our program to mix the private and academia, because both have two different, I would say, objective at the end. Academia are really open, try to publish and get everything open access and having some student, but the student are sometimes linked to, which can be really positive if they are linked to the industry, but at the same time, the industry want to make profit. That's their goal. So it's difficult to find a right balance here, and it takes time and a lot of discussion, I would say, to find the right balance.
Thank you, both of you. I think I will ask now the last one to Jan René Larsen to give a comment before we open up the floor for all of you to address all issues we have been discussing today. But I would like to introduce Jan René Larsen because he is the Deputy Executive Secretary from AMA Secretariat, and he's been giving a comment from the Arctic Council Working Group. So please, Jan René Larsen, I can see you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. AMAP is a working group of the Arctic Council, and we have the mandate to monitor and assess the status of the Arctic region with respect to pollution and climate change issues. And even though our assessments usually cover more than one theme, we also make assessments with a clear oceanic and marine scope. And all of these assessments, they are based on and very depending on monitoring and observing. Let me just mention the most recent example on Arctic ocean acidification. And the coupling between ocean acidification and climate research is obvious, since it is the increasing concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that impacts the acidity of the ocean. And with that assessment, AMAP wanted to understand the impacts all the way from the physics, the chemistry, to the biology, the ecosystem, and the societal impacts. And we were successful in a handful of cases, but the work also showed that there are many processes that are not understood or quantified, and where more coordinated and integrated research and observing are needed. It also emphasized that Arctic research and observing cannot be done by the countries themselves, and secondly, that it should always support societal needs. When it comes to cooperation, I think there are good reasons for strengthening research in the Arctic, but there are also good reasons for knowing and strengthening existing fora for cooperation. We've heard about IASC, about SCAR, about SUS. I would like to mention the Sustaining Arctic Observing Networks, SEAN, all fora where cooperation already exists and should be strengthened. We've also heard about the Arctic Science Ministerial process. There's an upcoming third Arctic Science Ministerial, and both the second and the third had observing as a theme. And this emphasizes and documents that observing is on the radar at the political level, but also that the political level should constantly be reminding about this commitment. So you can all go back to your science minister and remind them about this commitment about strengthening observing. And when it comes to obstacles, funding has been mentioned a couple of times, and I believe that if we want to do observing in a sustained way, coordinated funding across countries is key. So thanks a lot for the time.
Thank you very much, Jan. Of course, now we have only a few minutes left, but it has been a lot of very interesting presentations covering a broad range of aspects. And it's clear for me that there must be something in it for everybody, that's to get incentives to participate, to collaborate across sectors and disciplines. But now I open also the floor for the panelists if they would like to have some specific comments on what they've heard today. And I understand, Oskar, that you would like to give additional comments, so please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I was reflecting on what are the obstacles to sort of bridge the gaps between different knowledge systems. And indeed, there are multiple ways of knowing different knowledge systems. We, of course, represent also the traditional knowledge, the indigenous knowledge. I think to get further in this, even though things have progressed, I think we need to stop believing or perhaps pretending that we have perfect knowledge systems to us, because the challenges before us are of such proportions that we are actually dependent on using the best available knowledge to be able to cope. And what knowledge is that? Now, science has been and will be even more important in the future, also for reindeerherders, that much is clear. But we also have to utilize the indigenous knowledge, because it is only this way that 2 + 2 could become 5. We need 5 for the future. 4 is not enough. Thank you.
Use the best knowledge. I think everybody can agree upon that. That's a discussion on what is the best. This is exciting themes. Christian Risage Simonsen, you would also like to give a comment, and I think that will be the final one because the time is running out. But please, Christian.
Yes, so I just wanted to say thank you for a lot of good presentations here. I think it's obvious that there is a lot of good initiatives already ongoing in the Arctic, and lots of more ambition. So I just want to emphasize that you're all welcome to go in and comment on the Arctic Action Plan when the draft is ready. And really, yeah, encourage everyone to do that, because we have not been able to gather every single relevant person for the ongoing process. So we are very much aware that the additional consultation will be relevant. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. That was quite suitable for as a last comment before I say the closing remarks, because now I'll just give some more information about the next steps on this issue of co-designing, co-delivery the ocean science. First, a short regional discussion paper building on today's discussion will be developed. It will include insights, recommendations, and guidance for decade partners on the ways in which the fundamental barriers and issues can be addressed. Second, today's outcomes also inform in a second global session, Co-Designing the Science We Need for the Ocean Decade Part 2. That will take place on November the 24th. It is co-organized by IOC and the International Science Council. The registration will open quite soon. Thirdly, an integrated report on co-design solution-oriented research will also be produced to recap and draw out common recommendations and guidance. And the report is expected to be available in December this year. As we stressed throughout this session, collaborative, inter- and transdisciplinary research underpin the transformations sought by the ocean decades. We hope that today's discussion will inform the reflection on regional processes to develop regional action plan and foster multi-sector participation, creation of such as the one Christian described in the opening segment. Finally, it is expected that the insights shared today will also inform the development of decade actions and establish an innovative partnerships in response to calls for decade actions. So my last words will be that I would like to thank you all. I would like to thank the panelists and the participants for your contribution and interest. I really hope that you have enjoyed these 2 hours and learned a lot and get some inspiration to move on. And finally, I would like to also quote the UN statements, which I really find inspiring and beautiful, and that is the ocean we need for the future we want. And the vision of the UN Ocean Decade, the science we need for the ocean we want, is just perfect. So with that said, I would like again to thank you all, and I wish you all good health. Thank you.